The human body is capable of incredible things. When faced with disease, the desperate will try anything. In the 17th century, the rich and powerful of Europe were convinced that they had found the ultimate solution to illness. What if, they wondered, instead of fighting disease with herbs and holy water, what if they ingested the very essence of death itself? Explorers claimed that they saw blood seeping through the cracks in the tombs. Others spoke of hieroglyphics, detailing horrifying curses. Within its pages, he shared his thoughts on local customs. He also described the process of making mummies as more and more explorers returned to Europe, carrying tales of ancient curses and unfathomable rituals. Interest in mummies soared. By the late 1700s, every major apothecary in Europe was selling it. Maybe it's a testament to the lengths that grave robbers will stoop to. Whatever the reason, one thing is clear. The appetite for mummies was as real as the hunger for their flesh. And now you know the rest of the story. But despite these warnings, the obsession continued. The next step was inevitable. The rich bought it to stay alive longer. The desperate bought it to cheat death. At this point, nobody cared if the mummy was real or fake. The mere belief that it could help them live forever was enough for people to take the risk. This macabre elixir became known as mummy. This is the sound of an ancient curse being rediscovered. Bandits and grave robbers descended upon the Valley of the Kings, stealing and desecrating whatever they could find. What happened to the pharaohs after that is gruesome. Sometimes the bodies were burned, then ground into a powder that could be added to food or drink. Other times they were cut into chunks and boiled. The meat was then dried and sold in pill form. The fat was saved and used in ointments and salves. These days, the mummy trade has largely stopped. That doesn't mean, however, that the damage has stopped. Many of the remaining mummies have been defaced. Sometimes only a fragment of bone or a scrap of cloth remains. It's impossible to know what exactly happened to each of them. When the first Europeans arrived in Egypt in the 18th century, they encountered a mystery thousands of years old. In the deserts near Cairo, they found crumbling brick and stone structures filled with strange. There was one treatment in particular that caught their attention. Apothecaries in Arabic countries had concocted a salve using the resin of certain trees. This pitch-like substance had a unique ability to stop bleeding. Those who used it reported other benefits as well, including pain relief and protection against venomous bites. Over time, this resin became known in Europe as. But the people who sold it didn't know that its powers were derived from more than just the natural world. According to legend, the resin was often mixed with ground human bone. Instead of protecting against bites, the bone helped protect against the bite of death itself. Some of these corpses had been wrapped in cloth, others in stone coffins. Ancient Egypt, with its mysterious past, became synonymous with the secrets of eternal life. The Egyptians believed that the pharaohs were divine and destined for immortality. Their tombs were filled with treasure to sustain them on their journey to the afterlife. Could there be something in the tombs, somewhere between the riches and the remains, that unlock this magic? What if the key to everlasting life lay hidden inside the tombs of the Egyptian kings? Across the sands, the Europeans learned that these were the tombs of Egyptian pharaohs and queens. The term mummy comes from the Arabic word for mother, which was also used to describe these ancient rulers. With time, this name would twist and turn until it took on a new meaning. As European trade with the Middle East expanded, merchants carried back tales of mysterious healing remedies. With each passing year, European interest in the idea of immortality grew. As more and more explorers uncovered tombs in the Valley of the Kings, stories of bizarre rituals spread throughout Europe. In 1568, an Italian physician named Julio Cesare Casseri wrote a book about his travels in Egypt. The mummy trade was born. Mummy wasn't just being used as a medicine anymore. It was being used as a way to increase one's power. But there was a problem. The demand for mummy far outweighed the supply. Maybe this macabre tale is a reminder of just how far people will go for the promise of immortality. When the French writer Saint John Perse sailed from Suez to Marseille in 1881, he brought with him the ashes of an Egyptian mummy. He'd watched as villagers on the banks of the Nile tore the linen wrappings from a tomb, revealing bones so fragile they crumbled to dust. Wrapped bodies were stacked like timber, transported by boat across the Mediterranean. A few miles away, the infamous cache of over 60 intact mummies, discovered in 1997, proves that some secrets are better left undisturbed. In our eagerness to unlock the past, we must remember that some doors are best left unopened. We forget, sometimes, that even dust remembers. And as we swallow the past may yet swallow us. And delivered to markets with names like resin of Pharaoh, medicamentum, mummy or more, bluntly, medicamentum mummia. They arrived in London, in Lisbon, in Vienna, in crates that reeked of ancient decay. The customs agents turned their faces. The priests said nothing, and the apothecaries prepared their powders. In the polished parlors of Europe's elite, parties were held where guests sipped tinctures made from the liquefied remains of Egyptian royalty. Some even hosted seances afterward, laughing nervously as the candles flickered, unaware, unwilling to admit that their wine carried whispers. And yet, even as the nobles imbibed, the practice remained cloaked in half-truths. Physicians, eager to mask the horror, invented justifications. They claimed the desert had alchemized the flesh into something purer, more potent, that the embalming oils had preserved not only the body, but its spirit. That consuming, it was not desecration, but communion. But others knew better. In 1624, a Dutch traveler named Cornelis de Bruijn described how native Egyptians wept as their ancestors were torn from the ground. He wrote of one man who tried to bribe a grave robber to spare a tomb, only to be beaten, senseless, and left beside the empty sarcophagus. These acts were not archaeology. They were desecrations, fueled by Western hunger for miracle cures. And worse still were the forgeries. As real mummies became scarce, criminals turned to fresh corpses as slaves, beggars. They embalmed them hastily, in pitch and tar, wrapped them in old linens. These false mummies found their way into royal pharmacies, where even monarchs swallowed lies by the spoonful. One French King Louis XIV himself is rumored to have taken powdered mummy daily during his youth. His physicians believed it strengthened the blood, invigorated the heart. But even a sun king cannot outshine the grave. And always, in the background, the murmur of the East grew louder. Egyptian poets wrote bitter verses. Gravediggers spat when Europeans passed. Mothers told their children to never sleep near the tombs lest white men come in the night to steal their bones. Still, the trade continued. Because, to the European mind, Egypt was not a nation, it was a pharmacy. Its history, its people, nameless shadows whose value ended when their hearts ceased to beat. Back in France, he displayed the mummy remains in an elegant crystal vase. For the discerning collector, he explained, such relics were better than rubies. They were trophies of the human past. By the dawn of the 16th century, the looting of Egypt had become a profession cloaked in scholarship. European explorers, many sponsored by royal courts or secret societies, descended upon the Nile like vultures, drawn to a still warm corpse. They came bearing books and crosses, but also shovels, crates, and fire. Some called themselves historians, others physicians. In truth, they were neither. The desert sands bore witness to a new kind of conquest, not for gold. Caravans wound their way through the Valley of the Kings, not to marvel at its splendor. And yet, despite the grave robbing, the smuggling, and the mass deportations of the 19th century, there were still mummies left in the Valley of the Kings, slumbering beneath the desert sands. It est difficult for us today to understand the power that mummies held. Mummies held in the Western imagination, 17th and 18th centuries, a time when science and superstition were thoroughly intertwined, and when the possibility of immortality burned bright in the minds of thinkers across Europe. But there's more to the story than dusty shelves and half-remembered lore. There's blood and bone and the restless dead. The powdered mummy had many uses. Mixed with wine, it became a tonic for the noble classes. Deep River was the guilt, the quiet, knowing unease that no one dared name. Some began to report strange illnesses after prolonged use. Dreams of suffocation, of being wrapped in cloth, unable to scream. One noblewoman in Bavaria suffered from hallucinations so vivid she tore the paintings from her walls. Claiming the eyes of the pharaohs were watching her, she died clutching a vial of mummy powder in her bloodless hand. Still, the trade flourished. In England, the Royal Society published papers extolling the virtues of Mumia Varada. Surgeons soaked bandages in mummy wine before operations. Midwives used it to ease childbirth. Even children were given drops to cure nightmares. But what nightmares did the mummies themselves carry? Stirred into honey, it was applied to wounds and ulcers. They believed the body must remain whole for the soul to pass into the next world. To break the flesh was to trap the spirit, forever wandering. And here they were ground to dust, fed to strangers, lost in foreign bellies. If ghosts exist, is it any wonder they are angry? There is a story almost forgotten now of a ship that carried nothing but crates of mummy parts from Alexandria to Venice. Weeks later, fishermen found it adrift, sails torn, crew vanished. Only one note remained, nailed to the mast with a dagger. It read, "They were not meant for eating." Of course, such tales are dismissed. Superstition. They say folklore, but folklore is often just truth that time has tried to bury. Heated with mercury, it was said to cure epilepsy. But among the shadowed circles of occult scholars, there were darker applications still. Grimoire manuscripts of the time describe rituals involving the dust of kings. One text, Liber Tenebris, speaks of mixing the bones of the sun-born. Another warns the tongue of a drowned mummy may grant speech to the silent, but steals sleep in return. Whether these spells worked is beside the point. The belief was enough. Physicians debated in Latin. Apothecaries traded behind closed doors. But in the silence of the night, by firelight, many sought not healing but power. Join me as we travel back to a time when the line between life and death was as thin as the skin of a finger. In a stone tower overlooking the fog-choked streets of Prague, an old man sat hunched over a basin of blackened oil. His fingers trembled, not with age, but anticipation. Before him, suspended in a bath of vinegar and ash, floated a strip of mummified skin, pebbled, brown, and etched with the faintest trace of hieroglyphs. The alchemist whispered to himself, Latin phrases stitched together like charms. He was not trying to cure disease. No, he was trying to conquer death. Such men were not uncommon. By the late 17th century, the line between medicine and mysticism had been bled dry. The Renaissance, once hailed as an age of reason, had bred a monstrous paradox. Learned men in powdered wigs, who believed that the secrets of immortality lay in the bodies of the dead. To them, mummies were not merely medicinal, they were vessels, anchors of ancient power. Some whispered they held the memories of gods. And beneath all this, like a slough, the Egyptians had buried their dead with such care. The Enlightenment came like a sword of light, cutting through centuries of fog. The printing press roared. Telescopes turned upward. Scalpel met flesh with the cold detachment, and in the hallowed halls of science, whispers of powdered pharaohs grew quitter-a-shin, perhaps of what had once passed for knowledge. But some shadows do not vanish with dawn, and in the anatomy theaters of Paris, Vienna, and Edinburgh, physicians now turned from mysticism to empirical study. They sliced into fresh cadavers, traced nerves, labeled muscles. And yet, for all their progress, the cabinets of many medical colleges still contained glass jars labeled Mummies. Dried fragments, still flecked with resin and gold, lay beside formaldehyde. Old habits die slowly, especially when they are profitable. Even as modern medicine bloomed, rural apothecaries and provincial doctors continued to grind up mummified remains. It was no longer fashionable, but it was familiar, especially in Germany and Eastern Europe, where the cult of earth remedies persisted, and the dead were seen not as taboo. Reports began to surface strange and impossible. A surgeon in Bremen claimed that a young man under his care had developed skin lesions, shaped like hieroglyphs, after ingesting a tonic containing mummy. A priest in Naples accused a local healer of raising the wrath of old gods after a patient, dosed with mummy powder, began screaming in a forgotten tongue and clawed out his own eyes. These were dismissed. Of course. Madness, delirium, coincidence. But deep within Europe's medical underworld, a new theory began to take root, quiet, heretical, and terrifying. What if the act of consuming the dead was not neutral? What if the preserved soul, bound by linen and oil, was not truly at rest? What if the resin that sealed the body did not merely preserve flesh but imprisoned something older? These whispers reached the ears of one Dr. Wilhelm Erhard, an anatomist in Heidelberg. He was known for his obsession with ancient preservation and had amassed one of Europe's largest private collections of Egyptian remains. In his journal, later discovered hidden behind a false panel, he described recurring dreams of being embalmed alive, his organs taken one by one while unseen voices chanted in a hollow language. He died in 1793, found seated upright in his study, his eyes removed, his mouth packed with blackened linen. The authorities burned his notes, but the idea could not be unthought. In a strange reversal, the demand for mumia began to dry. not because of science but superstition, born not from ignorance, but from experience. Something in the practice had unsettled even the coldest of rational minds, and so, as the 19th century approached, the trade shifted, not vanished, no. Mummies were no longer eaten. Now, they were spectacles. In the drawing rooms of London and Paris, wealthy collectors hosted unwrapping parties, where the linen of ancient bodies was peeled away like fruit, revealing the withered humanity beneath. Guests gasped, laughed, fainted. No one thought to ask if the dead consented. They never did. Kit had moved from ingestion to entertainment, but the violence remained, and beneath every peeled bandage, behind every glass display, the question lingered like the scent of ancient resin. What price do we pay for stealing death?